I've always been a late bloomer, sexually speaking. I got my first kiss at age 7 from a 9-year-old boy at a Jewish sleepaway camp in the Catskills. It was all downhill from there. When puberty hit, I morphed from cute girl to gal pal, a slightly awkward, moderately overweight teen who was half proud, half horrified by the appearance of my ample breasts, hips, and pubic hair. By the summer after my senior year of high school, all my decidedly nice girl friends were intent on doing it before heading off to college. My best friend lost her virginity to the 24-year-old manager of a car wash where she worked on weekends. How was it? Did it hurt? I asked, eager for the details I knew were coming. It was okay, she said, her lack of enthusiasm more shocking to me than any act she could have described. I wanted to know what she was feeling, if she'd been scared, if the experience had changed her somehow. But my friend's new grown-up seeming coolness left me intimidated. Somehow, I knew not to press her for details. I'd hoped sex would come more easily to me once I got to college. By sophomore year, I'd even acquired a hometown honey, as we called them, a tall, lanky, fiercely introverted boy I'd known slightly in high school. He was as sexually inexperienced as I, and his existence at a small-town campus 6 hours away gave me an excuse to skip the hot, beery-smelling parties to which we Harvard underclassmen traveled in packs. I had romantic crushes, but the objects of my affection invariably ended up spending late nights in my room talking about the girls, or guys, they were truly interested in, while I dispensed sage advice. Though I had the opportunity to have sex on those infrequent visits from my beau, I felt too self-protective to go through with it. What if I did and then felt bereft when he left? What if sex caused me to fall inappropriately in love when I knew the two of us would not be together forever? But when I mentioned my agonized back and forthing to a friend, she only laughed and told me to go for it. It was no coincidence that I chose to do my senior year thesis on D.H. Lawrence, author of the once scandalous Lady Chatterley's Lover. My college roommates and I lived so close together that it was impossible to escape the muffled sounds, and sometimes, when I couldn't avoid it, sights, of the couplings going on around me. There were diaphragms on the mantelpiece above the wood-burning fireplace, and birth control pills spilling messily off bathroom shelves, casually displayed badges of honor. But my friends and I weren't exactly talking about sex, at least not the way I needed to. I felt fuzzy on the specifics of what exactly was happening behind all those closed doors. Was everyone having orgasms? Did my friends always have sex with the guys that they brought back to their beds? My questions felt too prying, yet naive to ask. I graduated with a bachelor's degree in British history and literature and the dawning of the AIDS crisis, as innocent as any 21-year-old with the taste for D.H. Lawrence could be. I wasn't a virgin anymore, at least technically, but I still felt like a raw beginner in the intercourse department. My shy guy and I had both lost it on the night of my 20th birthday on a summer evening when my parents were out of town. Physically, the experience was anticlimactic in both senses of the word. I'd felt far more aroused, been far more satisfied during our hours-long makeout sessions on the lime green final couch in my living room, even with one ear perpetually straining for my mother's footsteps padding down the hall. Not until I was out on my own, living in New York City, rubbing shoulders and bodies with business-suited men on the subway, did I begin to revel in the very new feeling of being a single woman in Manhattan with no one watching me. I'd landed a job as an editorial assistant at an old-school book publishing house and moved into a barely affordable apartment with 2 women I didn't know. Maybe it was the exhilarating freedom or the cigarettes I'd surreptitiously smoke now and then, but my extra pounds, the padding that had helped me to effectively keep most men away, started melting. I began going on dates with guys who slipped me their numbers at parties, who flirted with me in bars. For the first time in my life, I felt a little bit sexy. One night I had dinner with a man I'd known slightly years before. Back at my place, as we settled on my couch for a glass of wine, he ran a finger along my newly revealed collarbone, and I realized I had no idea what was expected of me, and no one I could ask. It would be fun to be in bed with this man, to have him touch me. But though he might eagerly embrace me, what would he think of me? Would he smirk to himself that I was a slut, ready to jump into bed at the first opportunity? What, I wonder, did people do sexually on a first date in New York City? So I plunged ahead and took the middle ground. I want to fool around, but I'm not going to have sex with you, I announced. If he was taken aback, he didn't show it. We went straight to the bedroom. Eventually, I moved on to a glossy, now-defunct women's magazine, where I quickly discovered that story ideas about sex were much in demand. That put me at a distinct disadvantage. In recent months, I'd started to gain weight again, the appreciative glances and dinner invitations dwindling with every added pound. Truthfully, I hadn't felt quite comfortable with this slender but curvy version of me and the attention it garnered. I'm the same person, I grumbled to myself, so why didn't anyone want me before? I could only conclude, sorrowfully, that men were as superficial as I'd feared. So I trained my focus away from men and toward my new job, and colleagues who, I assumed, were like the women in our magazine's often semi-fictional articles, confident at parties, bold in the bedroom, fit, forward, and polished. In story meetings, everyone talked knowledgeably about G-spots and multiple orgasms. When a writer pitched an article on how she survived a single year without sex, which, from what I could see, was exactly where I was headed, not only did we immediately draw her up a contract, but we deemed her tale of woe freakish enough to merit a plug on the cover. Yet despite my coworkers' high heels, good haircuts, and impossibly short skirts, I eventually figured out that most of them were less self-confident about sex, or at least love, than they let on, ping-ponging between bad boyfriends and crying quietly into their salads after a particularly nasty breakup. As for the friends I socialized with after work, most, like me, weren't getting enough sex for an ongoing conversation. Instead, we talked of our budding careers, downing bottles of cheap red wine while deeply probing each other's psyches. I took comfort in the fact that most women my age seemed a bit lonely and lost, too. Yet it felt too painful to address my biggest concern directly. Would I ever participate in the sexual plenitude that by all rights should be mine? I was, after all, in my early 20s, supposedly at my most desirable and free. If sex wasn't feeling like a possibility for me now, would it ever? A year of celibacy stretched into 6, punctuated in those pre-internet dating days with a very occasional, utterly unmemorable blind date. Then friends set me up with a short, smart, bespectacled journalist who was easy to talk to and seemed quirky in a nice way. "You beguile me," he told me on our second date, kissing me, his little round glasses glinting in the moonlight. At the relatively ripe age of 28, I fell in love. Soon after that night, I found myself in his bed, a pristine oasis in the middle of the messiest apartment I'd ever seen. I had gone 6 years without sex, and I was nervous, or at least my body was. "It's like trying to fit a round peg in a square hole," my new beau remarked after several minutes of fruitless maneuvering. Seeing my stricken face, he kissed me and said, "Don't worry, there's always tomorrow." And there was. The more we practiced, the better sex became. The better it became, the more I wanted. I felt like a 16-year-old boy trapped in a 28-year-old woman's body. I couldn't get enough. How did people accomplish anything in the world? Why did anyone bother getting out of bed at all? I wanted to talk about what I was feeling, shout about it from the tops of New York City's fire escapes to anyone who'd listen. Except I soon realized that it was unseemly to crow about how much fun I was having in bed. Apparently, not all couples had sex several times a night and lolled in rumpled warm sheets all weekend. Even with my closest friends, I felt constrained when it came to owning up to my desire. What if, as I now suspected, I loved sex too much?